Obviously, you have probably one of the best careers in biotech, certainly in Europe. What makes you wake up every day today still to help companies?
I think I like the interaction with the CEOs who are going through what I did. So I've just come off the phone to one of my CEOs now that's in the middle of something that's complicated, and I enjoy going through it with him, acting as a resource. And I'm relatively new into that company. And when he was interviewing me, I asked him what he wanted, and he said it's somebody to talk to. Somebody to talk to when I'm up against it, somebody who understands what I'm going through, somebody who can give me advice, but can also listen to me. And that's what I enjoy doing with them all in their various environments and getting them through stages and hopefully making things easier. I enjoy seeing the progress you can make. I enjoy seeing how things are happening now that I don't think would have happened if I hadn't been in the place at that time. So it's making difference.
I'm Pedro Coelho, your host, and this is The End Talks. In this episode, how durability built a 4.8 billion biotech with my guest, Edwin Moses. Well, we are off. So first of all, Edwin, thank you so much for making your here for today's event. I know you had some agenda to get together, so thank you and apologies for anything in advance. I'd like to start with asking, who is Edwin Moses and how did you get to where you are today?
That's a big question. So I was actually a fairly unusual background. I was born in Austria to an Austrian mother. My father was in Austria after the war, a British soldier, and he stayed on in Austria and worked for a while, but then came back when I was just one. So I had already a split cultural family. Got brought up in Wales in the UK, where my father had come from. And then really I went to university, but wanted to explore Germany again because I hadn't learned German as a child properly. And did a postdoc in Regensburg in the south of Germany, and the start of my international adventures. So when I finished my PhD and my postdoc eventually, I knew that I didn't want to be a scientist. I liked what I did. I enjoyed that, and I had a great time in Germany, but I wasn't going to be very good at that. And so I actually went to, I looked for jobs while I was living in Germany, and it was an American company that was a little bit like a biotech startup. It was very entrepreneurial, selling molecular biology and immunology reagents to the laboratory research market. So it was looking to build up a sales and marketing capability in Europe. Hired an Estonian who was setting up the force, and he and an American sales manager interviewed me. I went back, and after a few days, they called me and said, "Well, you were the worst candidate that we saw by a long way, but you're the only German speaker with a PhD that will do Außendienstmitarbeiter job, which is a salesman's job in Germany. And the Germans didn't want to do that if they were PhDs. So I was the only person, and they said, so we'll make do with you and we'll try and get that done. And then you look at these sort of funny moments you had. So one of the things you had to be able to do was drive. I couldn't drive. So I went on a crash course to learn how to drive. And I failed my test once and then twice. And normally then you're made to wait for about 6 months until you get to be a better driver. But my professor at the university actually wrote to the driving school and said, give him a break because otherwise he doesn't get this job, and please give him another chance. So the Germans in their wonderful way gave me another chance. And this time 2 examiners turned up in the car to make me extra nervous, one in the front and one in the back. And I was extremely nervous, and my whole future depended on whether I did. I made lots of mistakes, and at the end again, they said, "Well, you're a terrible driver. Please promise us you won't drive very much until you start to practice in car parks and do a lot better than this. But because you need this to get a job, here you go." So you look at these moments where if I hadn't had that bit of good fortune, the kind German driving instructors, and the American company that couldn't find anybody that was better than useless me, I wouldn't have had that chance. And I also got then the American company was really unusual and sent me to the US for 3 months to train. So I got taught molecular biology, immunology. I was a physical chemist, so I didn't really know that. Got taught selling skills, all those sort of things. So again, if you could write history backwards, what a fabulous education I got. They put me up in a hotel along with a bunch of other salesmen, but invested in me as an individual in a way that I don't think would ever happen today. So really lucky. It was run by a very good entrepreneur. So I got all those skill sets and got sent back to Germany and told, this is the north of Germany, here's your car, sell these products. There'd never been another salesman in the area before. And again, you either swim or drown in those situations. And I I enjoyed it. I'm an introvert by character, but I enjoyed going out there, meeting the people, and it was a very fulfilling sales role because every Saturday morning you actually got the orders sent to you that you created that week. So in the post would come a whole set of orders that you created by going around to the various universities. So you got very direct response when you were successful or not. So I think that was a real basis for me that I enjoyed tremendously. And I met my first wife through that, and the American lady who we were married for 20 odd years. That was very nice as well. I then went to Amersham, which was at that time a company in the UK which was selling again radio label products into the life science market. But I was lucky to be surrounded by a fantastic group of individuals who were learning sales and marketing. I could learn so much from them. So again, it's like going to business school, but I would just from the people I was working with and learning from. I had a French boss, Jean-Louis Bisson, who taught me first of all to think out of a box. I used to think everything was linear. You went from here to here to here, and he used to come up with the most crazy ideas. And then you suddenly realize how, gosh, that was a clever solution to something I'd never seen. So that went really well. I stopped staying. I decided to leave Amersham when, after 5 years of enjoying myself there, it was quite a civil service environment. And they told me that I couldn't be promoted to the next level, even though I was doing very well because I was too young. And I thought that was a terrible thing to say, that you're too young to do something. And so I started moving to biotech, worked with Chris Evans. So Chris Evans is quite not known in the UK in a company called Enzymatics. And it was the first time I've worked with somebody who could only see positives about everything. He saw an opportunity wherever he looked. He'd listen to every science. He would work like crazy. He would meet with some collaborators on a Friday night. On a Monday morning on your desk, you'd have a 20-page proposal that he'd written over the weekend. Clever. And he wanted to work in every area. So I got exposed to diagnostics, to phospholipid-based therapeutics, to astaxanthin coloring for salmon in fish farms, all those things we made and I had to go, I was the business development person, go and meet those people and try and sell them things. My most favorite contract I sold was a DNA fingerprinting contract to mushroom breeders. Now, good luck teaching mushroom breeders what DNA was, let alone what DNA fingerprinting was and why it might be helpful with them. So all those things just gave you a real sort of interesting outlook on life. And then I got a call generally one Sunday night saying, would you like to work in Italy? Out of the blue, we were happily living up in Cambridge with a young daughter. And this was an opportunity to go and work in Rome. And we hadn't thought about it before, but it was a time in my sort of early 40s when you thought, well, if I don't take this opportunity now, I probably never will. So we moved to Rome for 3 years and we had the most amazing exposure to Italian life, learned about the culture, learned that there are 200 types of pasta, which I certainly didn't know. And learned that trying to get Italians in for a 9 o'clock meeting in the morning was going to be very difficult. And you had to change, Northern European. There was a much more subtle way of doing business, a much more that I had to learn. Although my boss was an Italian American, and I still keep one of the things that he taught me then, which was, if it's worth doing, do it now. So I used to go into his office and say, well, Giovanni, what about this? And he said, let's call them now. And I go, well, no, and he really believed in that, and so now when I get an email from him, I reply immediately. Why wouldn't you? Why would you wait 3 days? And so anything worth doing is doing it straight away. So I learned a lot from that. Love Italy, go back all the time now. Hard place to do work, hard place to develop a biotech company, but loads of fun in doing it. And then I came back to get my first CEO's job in Oxford. I worked with two high net worth individuals who were ex-Oxford graduates, and they had supported some chemistry science. So they'd come out of university, professor there, and I was CEO with a company of 4 people in a garage, basically. There were 4 PhD students from the guy's lab. And we set up a service business, international service business, the pharmaceutical industry, selling them chiral compounds, and antimerically pure chiral compounds. And that was really life-forming for me. So we grew the company. I learned how to deal with VC investors, high net worth individuals. We took the company public on the full London Stock Exchange. We had revenues, we were profitable, all within about 5 or 6 years of me joining them. So we had really good technology, and so you just had to be ambitious and go out, and company like Vertex, big biotech, we used to go there and be very successful with them. And I just remember, sort of slightly off the story, but with Vertex, we went there and we had meetings with the CEO, the CSO, Josh Bozier, the CEO. And at that time, we identified a piece of equipment that could cast our slides on the wall. And my colleague was carrying this heavy piece of equipment in. You can't hardly believe it nowadays, but we gone from having sort of these transparencies put on light boxes. So we put this casting device, which then cast our slides up. And the whole meeting was completely misdirected by Josh Bose, the CEO, to find out where we got that equipment and when he could buy it. He was no longer interested in anything that we were talking about. It was that he just thought this was the next best thing that he really missed out. So it taught me something about don't introduce technology in discussion. So that company was super, but it was a company that by about the year 2000, we were just chemistry, and it became obvious to me that chemistry on its own wasn't good enough. Big idea, you needed biology as well. You could either develop that from scratch, take too long. We looked at buying companies, but it was the time when the genome revolution was happening and biology companies were worth a lot more than chemistry companies. So we actually took the active decision to sell the company to a biology company so you could combine those two capabilities. So I went through that selling process, the business of selling the thing that you built up, which is quite hard. It was hard for the management team when I announced that this is what I thought we should do because we were doing quite well. But I just felt that, yeah, we'd do well for a few years, but then we'd hit a brick wall because we were just missing that technology. So we sold ourselves to Biotech for about 300 and something million back in 2001. If you want to have a cry, it was a time when I lost my son. So it was just at the same time. I had a 5-year-old son who died on Christmas Eve. He went to bed perfectly healthy and died from a staphylococcus infection. He was dead the next morning when we woke up on Christmas Day. So I had to take time off from work, as you might imagine. But then we got back into the process and I sort of buried myself in work to sell the company and move the thing forward.
But was that a way to ignore what was going through in your life? Or not ignore, but perhaps cope with it in a way?
To fill the gaps in some way.
And at what point did you go back to process that? Because usually we always go back.
I think you constantly go back and process it. It never goes away. Something like that doesn't go away, but you just get, you're better able to manage it, I think. And I think it was interesting at the time. My wife was in quite a senior position in her company, but she wasn't at the top of the company. So when she went back, all the management came round to her. But as me as being CEO of the company, nobody quite knew how to comfort me, if that makes any sense. Or it was harder for them because of the hierarchy. It wasn't anybody's fault. So it was a tricky time. And we actually, at the time, was used to make a change. I became chairman of Oxo-Symmetry at that time because we decided we did want to sell the company, and that was a way to make it happen more quickly. So we changed all that structure. But it was difficult for my colleagues and myself as well because I knew my family. So then Oxo-Symmetry was sold. So I had a life-changing event in late 1999 with my child, and then we sold the company. So another life-changing event because another baby that you brought into the world you're selling off. And so I had a period about 3 or 4 years when I just did non-executive directorships around the world, around Europe mostly, and learned to work with lots of different companies in different cultures and different types of companies, service companies, drug discovery companies, and just learn my trade a little bit more. At that time, I went through a divorce. I found a new wife, married her subsequently, and she became, my first wife was very important, but she was very important then in my Ablynx journey because I've been made chairman of Ablynx in 2004, and in 2006, the board said to me, we need a new CEO. The CEO at the time was a very nice, good guy, Mark Beck, but he wasn't as ambitious as the board wanted him to be. So they wanted us to bring someone more ambitious in. I had hunted for ages. Every time I turned up with someone, I had five venture capitalists. They couldn't agree. I was on holidays skiing on Christmas with my new wife. We were sitting outside having a drink, as you do when you're skiing, and my phone went, and it was 2 of the venture capitalists, and they said, look, Edwin, we're absolutely sick of not getting a CEO. I said, I'm trying my best with the snow falling and my skis on. They said, what about you doing it, for goodness sake? And I hadn't seen it coming because it was biologics. Ablynx, I'd been small molecules. And although I could be a chair, I didn't really think I could be a CEO. And I actually genuinely looked up at my wife because she could hear the conversation. And she said, I think you've got another one in you. Why don't you have a go? We just bought a house in the UK and we were setting up our lives there. But we decided to take it. And we commuted for 5 years, which again sounds ridiculous, because we were on Sunday night or Monday morning, we'd drive up. Because one of my conditions when I said yes, I said, well, I'm not going to leave my wife for a week, and we've only just got married, so we're going to do this together. And so we did that for 5 years, commuted and came back on a Friday night and drove back and forth. And then one Friday night, we used to go mostly from Lille, which is quite close to Ghent, where the company was, and take the Eurostar across. We went to Lille. And on the Friday night, the Eurostar was cancelled. So we went back to Ghent for the weekend where we had a little flat. And we had a lovely time. And we said to each other, why don't we carry on doing this? It sounds ridiculous how we didn't get to it, but we didn't get to it. So we immediately started looking for a place, and we bought a place in Ghent, which we've lived in ever since. We still keep our UK place, but we live 90% of the time in Ghent. So then I took on the Ablynx role, which is 50 people, platform, biologics. I remember my first meeting with the employees. Most of them are Flemish, and if you know Flemish people, they're a type of person. They are completely trustworthy, reliable, solid, do what they promise. They're not always as ambitious as you might like them to be. And I remember that I went in there with a presentation that showed the logos of Genentech and Biogen, and they all literally laughed so hard and fell off their seat to think that this little company in Flanders could ever be in the same sentence as Biogen or Genentech. Well, of course, we are now in the same sentence. So they knew how good the company was and the technology, but they didn't have that level of ambition. And that's really all I brought to the company, was an ambition to really be successful. And then had 16, 17 years there working with the company. And one of the things, because I bring my wife back into it, which I was thinking about, is really important. She never got paid a cent by the company, and that wasn't part of the deal. But she got very interactive with the company. She's much more social than I am. And so first thing we looked at is parties. We like good company parties, and she found that, we found that the Ablynx from before I was there was hiring a party maker, someone who does that. Just tell them to the party. And she said, well, I'm not doing that. It's too expensive. And anyway, so he said, I will sit there. I will get a social committee of volunteers, ask them what they want, and help them then to deliver it, and show them how you can deliver even fantastic things cost effectively, and how you can do it. And one good example was they had an idea amongst the employees. They want to do something about the Orient Express. So they said, but it'll be too expensive. And she said, well, no. And said it would be great if we could give free tickets to the Orient Express, to the winners of prize at the party. No, but it'd be too expensive. And he said, no, I'll tell you what, I'll contact the Orient Express and see what they'll do for us. And sure enough, they gave us 2 free tickets for the Orient Express. All we had to do was put some of their brochures around at the party. And in those very little things, she showed them, she didn't come from our industry, but how you can make things happen, but just think a little bit out of the box. So we had huge parties with hundreds of people there, all in themed outfits. But we wanted to make the parties and the social activities, lots of sports activities, as memorable, as world-class as the science. We wanted people to remember it. It's one of the nicest things I like is when I talk to ex-Ablynxers now, they said it was the best time of their lives. Professionally and the things we did all the time, it was really very, very special. So had a really nice time there, went through lots of fundraising, learned an awful lot, took the company public in Europe, then took it public in the United States, really interacted heavily with investors, but then also with collaborators such as Merck and Boehringer, and getting big collaboration together, and worked with a really very strong C-suite team that made things happen in their different environments. So it was a great place to be. Enjoyed it a lot. And then we got the out of the blue approach from Novo Nordisk to buy the company, which we rejected, but Sanofi then bought the company in 2018. And I heard in one of the talks, and I said to someone who sold the company to you, actually it was you, what's it feel like? It feels very strange. So 1 minute it's 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. It's all you think about. And I remember we told it to Sanofi, had handed over very cleanly, and I said, but I will leave because they didn't know nothing for me here. Now, I remember, I think it was the end of August, and the employees didn't quite believe it, and I wrote an email to everyone, the CEO is leaving the house, and I went in the car, my wife and I drove to Austria for a holiday, and you just feel there's a complete void there. It's a little bit like losing a child. Again, it's an emptiness that you feel, because just quite hard to explain to anybody. You will understand it exactly.
Absolutely.
And I think I was in shock for a few weeks, even though it had been coming for 6 months. I'm not sure if you can prepare yourself for that. But after a few weeks, I thought I need to do something and really think what I want to do. And I wanted to do more of these non-executive directorships and be chairman of companies where I could be really involved and learn. And that's what I've been doing then for the last period of time, getting involved in lots of different companies with different challenges, different technologies, different people. I feel I'm learning all the time, which I like a lot. I hope I'm contributing something back to them. I think I am. And working with management teams to solve their problems and think of ways of developing companies' future is something I really get excited about. So that's what I do. People say, what do you do for a hobby? Help companies. Help companies. My major thing is I like keep fit and all those sorts of things, but the thing that I took up that I'm quite an advocate for is Bikram yoga. I don't know if you know what that is. This is hot yoga. So this is 26 poses that you do in a very prescribed fashion, but at 41 degrees centigrade and 50% humidity. And my wife introduced me to this in 2012. I was coming in a very bad time with the company, share price being terrible. It was just a lot of pressure. And she said, I'm going to take you to this thing called hot yoga and see. I went to the gym quite a bit. That's a very solitary sort of thing. And she said, this thing will have you go into a room with, say, 10, 15, 20 other people at 41 degrees, and you'll do some exercise with them. But you'll have to take your top off as well as wear shorts. And I said, I'm not going to take my top off in public. I'm British. And I go into the room.
How many minutes?
I think 30 seconds. Absolutely so hot. And it's a fantastic exercise regime because for those 90 minutes, you can do different time then. You are so absorbed into staying alive that everything else is gone. And it's also fun because you actually have a camaraderie with the other people in the room. So that, there were all the young people in the room who were very fit, but I remember we had one guy who was 300 pounds in weight, came in, he could hardly bend over at first. And everybody enjoyed how he got better and could bend down and could do things he could never do before. It's a real team collaborative, and I normally don't get so excited by those sort of things, but that really, I've done it. So I've done it ever since. And even when COVID came, we set up a room in the house where I could get the room to 40 odd degrees and the same humidity. Yeah. So I do that now as one of my sort of exercise routines and things to make it. And it was particularly useful when I was traveling a lot as a CEO, because you can go to New York and drop into a class just like that, or Los Angeles, and people, you're doing the same routine and the same things. So it's very nice. I mean, the only thing is the Americans make the room hotter because they have to. And it's even more taxing than it would be in Europe.
Yeah, the Americans always have to do something better, even if it's higher temperature.
Absolutely. And one of the funniest times I was in New York and I went to one of these classes, and at the end of it, I was feeling very hot, extremely hot. And the lady came over to me, one of the participants, and said, "Are you all right, sir?" Because I looked in the mirror, I was bright red, and I went, "Oh, get red." And I said, "I'm sorry." She said, "Well, sir, if you'd only spoken to us, but we regulars realised that you were stood under the heater. That was why we were all stood well away from you, sir. You were stood into the hottest part of the room. That's why you were so hot." I said, "Thanks for telling me."
Next time I'm here. No. Oh no. I mean, Edwin, obviously you have probably one of the best careers in biotech, certainly in Europe, questionably across the world, but certainly in Europe, I would say. Probably the very best, if not one of the best, or the other way around. At what point, and I'm sure that even probably with your first sale at the 300 rough billion valuation, it's life-changing money regardless, right? You get to a point where you don't have perhaps work again, but then yet you continued firstly still at distance, as I usually say, or as a coach, because you're not in the field playing yourself. And then you came back to be a player and you did it again with Ablynx. And then again, yet a probably generational wealth change event. Well, you're right, and I agree with you that when I sold my first company as well, there was a void, a full gap, and you're like, now what? Yeah, like it's as if there's a blank space in your heart and you don't understand how to fill it up again. Most people that haven't done this believe that because of the money, it doesn't matter anymore, because now you have so much money, you don't need to care. How does one that obviously had now generational wealth done, how did you process that, even though you have this empty heart, but then you obviously have a bank account that you probably don't have to do anything again? How do you change your mind, or did you change your mind, or how do you get your mind rewinded again to do it the second time around, and then after the second time around to yet still get involved in helping companies, waking up every day not as if, because I'm sure you see chairman roles and etc. as a job, right? So how did you switch this mindset, even though obviously you could probably be somewhere in an island with your feet up, and yet again, what we see is that people that do this aren't. So,
and you can imagine that ex-colleagues and people ask me this all the time, and it's one of these things where I don't understand the question in a funny way. I do understand what you say, but it's not something that, and I think that when I look back at it, what happened? Well, I think that I told you where I was born. My parents were both working class. So my dad went back to the UK, and they both were labourers, the absolute bottom of the pile labourers. And one of the things I did as I was growing up, I made a point of, during the summer holidays, going to work in both their factories as a summer job. I only had to work there 8 or 9 weeks or whatever the summer holiday period was, but I wanted to experience what they had to experience. And they were like that because they had another option. My father had to leave school when the war started. He was a very intelligent man, but he'd missed all his education. And my mother was good too, but missed education. And I just thought, I never want to do this. They've got no choice but to do this. They're miserable jobs that are horrible, 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 boring. I got a small taste, which was always easy because you knew you were getting out. But at least I got a flavour of it. And it made it very easy for me to motivate myself. And all I've thought throughout my career is, how lucky am I to do something that I like doing, that I like. Of course you have bad days, and of course you have bad things, but 99% of it is you're fun, you're dealing with smart people, you're doing with interesting intellectual challenges, and you're hopefully creating something valuable as well. So I never had a problem in doing that. And I think the other thing was I probably made it rather early. So in 1998, when we went public for the first time, I got some serious money through the door. The only thing I wanted to do with it, and coming from a very working class family, was pay off my mortgage. I hated debt. The idea of owing anybody anything, that really bothered me. So since that time, I've never owed anybody anything. I never will. That's my relief of having a few euros in the bank, is that I don't want to have debt. I don't want to be reliant on people. And then from that point onwards, I really had sufficient funds to do what I want in my life. It means I do nice things and everything else, but trying to buy a Porsche, I don't want a Porsche. It doesn't interest me. Why do I need to do that? Fine if people want to. And so when the Ablynx thing happened, it didn't change what we do at all. We do the same sort of things. We might travel business class on a plane a little bit more often than we used to. Probably that's the only shift in real thing. But honestly, otherwise, we had a lifestyle that we liked, and we enjoy it now. So, it's hard to come to terms with it because you don't. I know when we went to the estate planners and people like that, they said, well, you really haven't got it planned better than this. And we don't come from a family of wealth. We don't have great aspirations of what to do with it. We want to make sure our family are comfortable. So yes, it's a little bit strange, but it doesn't prey on my mind because I'm just very lucky to have, for a long time, been able to have the life I wanted.
it's amazing to hear. I mean, you talked about your friend and his Porsche, but there's usually, most people at least, and maybe you don't, and I'll be curious to hear, most people, when they have an event in their life, they try to market with something. Yeah, some people buy a watch, some others buy a house, others buy a car. Did you buy anything that actually marked an exit like Ablynx that you can share or want to share? Whatever that is.
Yeah, we did. We funded a party for 250 of our Ablynx colleagues, which we called the Hats Party. So we didn't want to make everybody dress up this time, but you had to wear a hat of whatever you wanted to do. We had Hespadil, who's quite a famous Dutch singer, come to it. And that was our present to ourselves and them, to have a fantastic night out with the people who'd helped us create that wealth. So that was the only thing, to be honest, that I brought myself.
And you probably know this, but you know that sends a huge message as a leader, right? That you actually prefer to perhaps even give back to all the people that did it with you rather than just for your own self.
Yeah. I think, but I didn't do it to send a message, just to be clear. I did it because I thought it was the thing I really wanted to do. And I thought of, could we give cash to everybody, and then just tax-wise, it was so most of it would go lost. So I just wanted to make the demonstration to everybody. And again, nobody, particularly in the Belgian environment, believes that I didn't take that money from the company and do it. Nobody believes that you would just spontaneously do it because it felt like the nice thing to do, but it was.
I believe it, and trust me, I've done a fair share myself of things like this. But that's for another podcast, another day. I'm curious to ask you yet another question. I mean, after two events, obviously even the IPO first, and then probably, I guess, again, generational wealth change, what makes you wake up every day today still to help companies?
I think I like the interaction with the CEO. So going through what I did, so I've just come off the phone to one of my CEOs now that's in the middle of something that's complicated, and I enjoy going through it with him, acting as a resource. And I'm relatively new into that company. And when he was interviewing me, I asked him what he wanted, and he said it was somebody to talk to. Somebody to talk to when I'm up against it, somebody who understands what I'm going through, somebody who can give me advice, but can also listen to me. And that's what I enjoy doing with them all in their various environments and getting them through stages and hopefully making things easier. I enjoy seeing the progress you can make. I enjoy seeing how things are happening now that I don't think would have happened if I hadn't been in the place at that time. So it's making difference. And if I give up, I stop doing some non-executive work in certain companies, and that's always the same reason. Because I honestly look in the mirror and think, I'm not making a difference. And that can be my fault. That could be the fault of the company. It doesn't really matter. I won't take the money if I'm not making a difference. I won't waste their time. So I leave. And that's quite a hard test for the company as well. But I can respect myself if I just don't like turning up and taking a check. It's horrible. I've got to do a lot more than that to be worth their time and even having an association with me.
I'll tell you something you probably don't know. My first ever job in life sciences was actually working in recruitment for the Benelux market. So as you can imagine at the time, there was this great company called Ablynx and a great leader in that company. And I came across you probably in my 5th day at the job on the LinkedIn profile. I was like, wow, what a great profile. And obviously, eventually I think I did even some work as a recruiter with Ablynx and so forth many, many months ago. And then eventually at Jefferies, I think now, what was that, almost 2 years ago, we met for the first time. And I looked at you and was like, wow, this is Edwin, and who I've obviously knew of you, but didn't know you. Introduced myself, and obviously we spoke at the time. And after this, I was like, wow, such a normal person. And that stayed with me for a long time, by the way, even though you probably never even imagined that this would have been the case. And that was because indeed a lot of people that have had the success that you've had change, because perhaps the star effect, perhaps the fame, perhaps the people look up to them, whichever, or the wealth, whatever that is. And you haven't. And you already explained a little bit before as well about your upbringing. But if you look back, besides your parents being so perhaps grounded and allowing you to ground yourself by working at the factory and so forth, is there something else that makes you, looking back perhaps in history as a child and as a youngster, that kept you so true to yourself and to who you really are?
I think I was a late developer. It was interesting. I still every 6 months meet up with those school colleagues. So it's quite strange, as we all get older. And the other day, about 7 or 8 of us sitting around the table, and one of them just sort of said, "What were your exam results, A levels, which are the things in secondary school?" And we all were around the table, and mine were the worst. Now, in pure sort of monetary terms, I've done the best. Everybody's done very well, but they all looked and sort of said, and they know that I've done okay. And they you only got that, and we were all there. And I said, yeah. And I sort of thought, and I think there were quite a few strange things in terms of my sort of education, because my sister was older than me, and she was very smart, and she was the first person from our extended family to go to Oxford. And my father was very proud of that, of course, with all that he'd not managed to achieve because of timing. And he sort of expected me to get to Oxford, and I didn't. And again, you hear sort of, this is like a repeat theme. So I applied to Oxford 1 year, and they basically response was, well, we liked you, but you didn't get a high enough grade to pass. So would you like to try again? So I actually took a year off, worked for a year, and tried again, partly because my father so much wanted me to go into Oxford. And I got the same thing again. You're just not smart enough. We think you're quite fun, it's nice to chat to you, but no, you're not good enough. And that's quite hard to take when you're 18 or 19. And probably the hardest thing was his disappointment, because he just wanted to go to the factory and say, I've got 2 kids in Oxford, and most of you have got nobody in university. And so that was, you felt you were almost second best going to wherever I went, Sheffield University, and then there from there. So I think you realised you had sort of hurdles to go up quite I was also quite competitive. So of all the sports, I played table tennis to international level. And that meant for 4 or 5 years playing 6-7 days a week. I mean, if you were going to be any good, you really had to be that devoted to it.
We have a table downstairs, right?
So I'm not going anywhere near. And it was, so I enjoyed doing stuff to a high level and enjoyed doing that. But yeah, I would regard myself as coming, but I put that down to my parents and the expectations. We didn't have it sounds ridiculous. We didn't have a telephone. We didn't have a car, but we didn't feel badly done by. And I mean, we didn't sit there thinking, what didn't we have? We've had a perfectly happy life getting on with life. And I think having been through in that situation, you're pleased with what you've got, but it doesn't really change you as a result.
And by the way, we have a common story there with Oxford. My father wanted to have a son that would be a doctor. My brother became a dentist, so close enough, but perhaps not there yet. And then I really wanted to study and eventually got accepted into Oxford Medical School, but told my father that I didn't want to do it. So the disappointment was real. The argument was real too. But I stayed true to myself and decided to do what I wanted to do. And obviously it was a complicated conversation to have, but shaped up to be who I am today. So we definitely have that part in common, at least. Without going too long into this, and perhaps with one final question to wrap up, Edwin, when all is done and eventually life comes to an end, how would you want people to remember Edwin?
As a nice guy who was kind to the people he interacted with and made people laugh.
You definitely do. Thank you for the positivity and for sharing your story.
Pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Edwin.